Welcome to the deep dive. We take a whole stack of information, articles, research, our own notes, and we try to pull out the really important nuggets, the stuff that helps you get genuinely well informed.
And today, our mission, it's a big one. We're journeying right into the heart of unpredictability.
Yeah, figuring out why the most impactful events, the ones that really shape our reality, so often just catch us completely by surprise.
Exactly. Think about those moments that just redefined history but seem to come, well, out of nowhere.
Like the 1987 stock market crash.
Perfect example, Black Monday. One single day, the market just plummeted. Biggest drop in modern history, really.
And there was no obvious reason, right? No big news story that morning.
No clear, discernible trigger. Nothing you could point to. It just happened. Or, think about a hypothetical, but it really makes the point. Imagine if 9/11, tragically, was prevented.
How?
Let's say some legislator on September 10th pushed through a really unpopular law, required locked, bulletproof cockpit doors on all planes, continuously locked.
People would have hated that, the cost, the inconvenience.
Totally. They'd call the legislator a lunatic, probably, but that act would have saved thousands of lives. And that person. They'd face scorn, maybe lose their job, never even knowing the disaster they prevented.
That's a chilling thought. And these are what we're calling black swans, right?
That's the term. Highly improbable, yes, but also incredibly high-impact events. They defy our predictions, yet they completely alter our world.
So they really force us to challenge everything we think we know about certainty, about knowledge itself.
So our purpose today, it's clear. Understand why these black swans surprise us, how we tend to misinterpret the past, looking backwards, and ultimately how we might adapt better. Because they do exist. They keep happening.
We have to live with them.
We do. And our starting point for this dive is actually a fascinating concept from the brilliant Umberto Eco.
The semiotician.
Yeah, his famous anti-library.
Okay, I've heard of this. It wasn't books he had read.
Exactly the opposite. It was thousands upon thousands of books he hadn't read. It lined his home.
So not just a quirky collection.
Far from it. It was a living, breathing metaphor for the sheer vastness of our unknowledge. All the things we don't know that we don't know.
Yeah.
And how vital it is to just acknowledge that frontier.
That's a really powerful image. An anti-library. What we don't know being more important than what we do.
In a way, yes. It highlights the boundaries.
So today we're going to explore how this massive anti-library, this unknowledge, impacts pretty much everything. Our personal choices, global events.
We'll dig into why our minds seem hardwired to crave these neat stories, this false sense of certainty, even when we're staring randomness right in the face.
And look at the flaws in how we try to predict the future, which often seem kind of funny in hindsight, I guess.
Definitely. We'll examine those flaws, and we need to make a crucial distinction between different types of unpredictable events. Not all randomness is the same.
Okay. And the goal isn't just understanding why we get surprised.
No, the goal is to move beyond that, to uncover, practical insights, maybe even some strategies. How do you not just survive, but maybe even thrive in a world that's fundamentally dominated by the unknown?
So get ready to challenge your assumptions.
Yeah.
About knowledge, about experts, about what it really means to be prepared.
Exactly. Buckle up.
Okay, so to really get why these black swans blindside us, we have to start with a pretty fundamental truth about our own knowledge. Or maybe our lack of knowledge.
Which brings us back to Umberto Eco's anti-library.
Yeah.
That's our jumping off point for what we'll call part one. Umberto Eco's anti-library and the quest for validation.
Right. This journey into black swans really starts with this core idea of anti-knowledge. The critical importance of understanding what you don't know. It feels backwards, doesn't it? We're always told to learn more, fill our heads.
It's deeply counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But the argument here, the central one, really isn't about trying to predict black swans. As we'll see, it's basically a fool's errand.
So what's the alternative?
The alternative is to adjust to their existence. To focus on this anti-knowledge, this awareness of the unknown, specifically to maximize your exposure to the good kind of rare events. Serendipity, positive surprises.
Like in science or investing.
Think about scientific discovery or venture capital, yeah. The unknown, the unexpected breakthrough, often offers these completely disproportionate payoffs. You might have relatively little to lose on any one experiment or investment.
But the upside could be huge.
Exactly. Much to gain from that one rare event. The biggest breakthroughs almost always bubble up from the edges. From outside are neat little boxes of understanding.
And Eco's anti-library becomes this symbol then, right? More than just books.
It's such a powerful symbol of intellectual humility. It's not about showing off what you've read, what you've mastered. It's about standing in front of those shelves and acknowledging the sheer, humbling volume of what lies outside your grasp.
It's not about feeling bad you haven't read them all.
No. It's about respecting the vastness, recognizing how much more there is to learn, to discover, to potentially be surprised by.
And this isn't just some abstract idea. You mentioned an experiment.
Yeah, it illustrates this perfectly, this human tendency towards, well, let's call it epistemic arrogance.
Knowingness, overconfidence in what we know.
Pretty much. So imagine 60 people, bright, educated folks gathered together. They're asked to estimate the number of books in Eco's actual library, his real one.
Which had how many?
30,000 volumes. A lot of books.
Okay. And how do they do?
Terribly. Not a single person's projected range, their best guess, plus or minus some margin for error. Not one included the actual number.
Seriously, no one even got close enough to have it in their range.
Nope. Some guessed way too low, others guessed astronomically high. But nobody's estimation process, their mental model of how many books can a person own, was calibrated correctly.
Wow. So even smart people, their internal compass for uncertainty is just way off.
It demonstrates this ingrained tendency perfectly.
Way off.
We overestimate what we know, and at the same time, we drastically underestimate uncertainty. We kind of compress the true range of what's possible.
And that applies way beyond counting books.
Oh, absolutely. It applies to our understanding of the world, of markets, of history, of risks. We think we have a decent handle on things, but our grasp is often far more limited than we admit, and we're way too confident in our flawed certainty.
It's this overconfidence, this epistemic arrogance that sets us up to be blindsided.
Exactly. It's a cognitive shortcut that often blinds us to the real structure of randomness, and it's a major cause of what we call black swan blindness. Our brains compound the problem because they're prone to the error of confirmation.
Seeking out evidence that fits what we already believe.
Right. We actively look for and focus on these pre-selected segments of the scene, the things that confirm our narrative, and then we generalize from that tiny slice to everything else to the unseen. We cherry-pick reality.
Ignoring anything that might challenge our tidy little worldview.
Precisely. Which brings us neatly to another really fascinating and frankly quite poignant idea. The unseen heroes, and this thing called the fallacy of silent evidence.
Unseen heroes. People who prevent bad things from happening.
Exactly. People whose successful actions prevent disasters, yet they get zero recognition because the negative event, the disaster, never actually occurred. They leave no trace because they succeeded.
That's a deep irony. The better they are, the less evidence there is they did anything.
It's more than ironic. It's a profound kind of ingratitude baked into how we perceive the world. And the silent hero often feels useless, never knowing the true, perhaps monumental impact of their actions or preventative measures.
Like that legislator thought experiment again.
Let's revisit it. The courageous, maybe slightly crazy legislator who on September 10th, 2001, rammed through that law for locked cockpit doors. Expensive, inconvenient, everyone complains. It prevents 9/11.
But they get no praise.
No praise. Only scorn for the cost, the hassle, the perceived overreach. They'd never know they saved thousands of lives. Their success is invisible.
Whereas figures who react after a disaster often get praised.
Right. Think of Richard Grasso, the NYSE chairman back then.
Yeah.
After 9/11, he got a huge bonus for saving the stock exchange, largely by just visibly ringing the opening bell on TV, a very public, visible act.
Which probably had little actual impact compared to automatic market mechanisms, right?
Arguably, yes. But it was seen, it was dramatic. The media and our minds latch onto the visible, the sensational. We completely ignore the quiet, preventative acts that actually make the difference, but leave no visible trace.
This connects to an ancient story, doesn't it? From Cicero.
A brilliant and incredibly powerful insight from the Roman order Cicero. He told the story of Diagoras, who was known for being a non-believer.
Okay.
Diagoras was shown these painted tablets, these pictures, depicting worshippers who had prayed during shipwrecks and miraculously survived. The clear implication was, see, prayer works, divine protection.
Proof. Except
Diagoras asked a devastatingly simple question. Where were the pictures of those who prayed then drowned?
Oof, that cuts right through it.
Absolutely. It's the perfect illustration of the fallacy of silent evidence. We see the survivors, we see the successful cases, the lottery winners, the miracle cures, and we're led to believe in miracles or maybe attribute it all to skill or divine favor.
But the failures, the drowned worshippers, they're invisible.
Completely invisible. They don't write memoirs. Their stories aren't told. And this fundamentally skews our perception of reality. It makes life seem much more stable, predictable, and controllable than it actually is.
It's a bias that thinkers spotted centuries ago.
Yeah, people like Montaigne and Francis Bacon later echoed Cicero's insight. They saw how easily this focus on the survivors, the winners, leads us to form completely false beliefs about cause and effect.
And this isn't just ancient history. It applies everywhere, especially in these winner-take-all fields, like literature.
Oh, dramatically so. Think about what we call our literary heritage. It represents a minuscule fraction, a tiny sliver, of everything that's actually been written and produced over the centuries.
Most books just vanish.
Exactly. Honoré de Balzac, in his novel Lost Illusions, gives this really cynical but probably quite accurate portrayal of literary success. He suggests it's often more a product of wile and promotion, of connections and luck, than just pure raw talent.
He has a character whose manuscript gets rejected.
Right. Lucien de Rubempré. His manuscript is rejected unread. Then later, once his reputation is artificially inflated through networking and hype, the same manuscript is accepted, also unread.
So the success wasn't about the book itself changing.
Not at all. It was about the perception, the narrative, the luck of the draw. Balzac talks about nightingales, these countless, incredibly talented authors whose brilliant works just languish forgotten in this immense cemetery of unpublished or unread books.
So when we just look at the famous authors, the bestsellers, and say, pure talent.
We commit an injustice. We completely ignore the disproportionate luck of those few who happen to survive the brutal filtering process of publishing, history, and public attention. We ignore the silent evidence of equally talented writers who never got that break.
It's a sobering thought about meritocracy. And this bias, this silent evidence thing, it can show up in even more disturbing ways, right? Like the health club for rats idea.
Yeah, that's a more vivid, maybe even vicious illustration. Imagine a population of rats. They're subjected to increasingly harsh conditions, like a sort of rat gulag. Stress, poor food, danger.
A grim picture.
Now, if you only look at the rats who survive this ordeal, they might appear stronger, tougher, more resilient than the original average rat.
Because the weak ones died off. Survival of the fittest.
That's what you might conclude if you only see the survivors. But the hidden truth is that every single rat, even the ones who made it through, strong or weak initially, is actually weaker after the experience. They're damaged, stressed, less healthy overall.
But the observer, ignoring the dead rats,
completely ignores the silent evidence of the dead. They mistakenly conclude the harsh treatment is somehow beneficial, that it builds character or it selects for strength. It shows how easily we misinterpret mere survival as some kind of enhancement or skill, when it might just be luck, or simply less severe damage compared to those who perished.
That is a chilling analogy. It really highlights how our focus on survivors' biases our understanding.
And this bias subtly affects us personally, too. It lowers our perception of past risks once we've survived them. We look back and think, oh, that wasn't so bad, or I handled it. We forget the terror or the genuine possibility of failure.
So we might inherit this taste for risk-taking from the lucky ones.
We might have inherited a taste for uncalculated risk-taking, precisely because the foolish risk-takers, the Casanovas who survived, purely by chance, are the ones whose stories get told, whose genes might get passed on. The prudent ones who avoided the risk leave less dramatic tales.
Our belief in evolution always producing the optimal is maybe flawed then.
Deeply flawed. Evolution isn't some grand, directed plan towards perfection. It's a messy, chaotic series of flukes, of trial and error, heavily influenced by luck and random events. And we only see the good ones, the lineages that happen to survive, not the countless ones that didn't.
So even our own existence.
Our very presence here, as human beings alive today, is itself a massively consequential, low-probability occurrence. It's a form of anthropic bias. We're here, so we assume the conditions that led to us must have been likely or inevitable. We forget how incredibly, astronomically lucky we are just to exist in the first place. We are the surviving rats, marveling at our resilience, forgetting the graveyard.
Wow. Okay, that's a heavy thought to end part one on. Our existence is a black swan.
In many ways, yes. Which leads us right into the next layer of complexity.
Which is part 1.3, the allure of narrative and its perils. So building on this idea of what we see versus the silent evidence, there's another huge factor distorting our view, our love of a good story.
Absolutely. Our brains seem almost irresistibly drawn to narratives. We have this deep-seated need to construct stories, to find causal links, to make things make sense. It's been called a theorizing disease.
A disease? That sounds serious.
Well, maybe condition is better. It's not really a choice we make. It seems largely anatomical. It's the brain's default option. Resisting the urge to create a narrative, to just accept randomness or complexity, takes conscious, considerable effort.
So it's not just journalists trying to sell papers, it's us, the audience, demanding the story.
Very much so. The public generally prefers stories, simple explanations, clear heroes and villains, a neat cause-and-effect chain over raw, complex, abstract statistics, even if those statistics are more accurate. We want the narrative arc.
It connects to that idea of information compression, doesn't it? Kolmogorov complexity.
Exactly. Think about it. A book filled with truly random words is incompressible. You can't summarize it without losing information. But a book that just repeats the same sentence over and over can be reduced to a tiny pattern. Repeat sentence X n times.
Our minds prefer the pattern, the compressed version.
We crave those compact patterns, those simple narratives. They're inherently more appealing, easier to remember and process than raw, messy, unorganized information. And that leads us to massively oversimplify randomness, to impose order where none exists.
And this craving for narrative, it actually messes with how we understand probability, right?
Profoundly. Kahneman and Tversky did these classic experiments. In one, they asked people which statement was more likely to be true. 1, Joey seemed happily married, he killed his wife. Or 2, Joey seemed happily married, he killed his wife to get her inheritance.
Logically, the first one has to be more likely, right? Because the second one is a subset of the first. Killing your wife for any reason includes killing her for inheritance.
Logically, yes. Killing his wife is a broader category.
Mm-hmm.
But what did people choose?
They chose the second one, didn't they? The one with the reason.
Overwhelmingly. The added detail, the causal narrative, even though it was just speculation, made the specific scenario feel more plausible, more probable to people's intuition, even though it's logically less probable.
That's incredible. Our brains will literally bend logic to satisfy the need for a why. A good story trumps cold probability.
It prioritizes narrative coherence over statistical truth. We want the explanation, the motive. It makes the event less random, more understandable, even if the explanation itself reduces the overall likelihood.
And this ties into that grim quote attributed to Stalin.
1 death is a tragedy, 1,000,000 is a statistic. It highlights the same point. Concrete, vivid anecdotes, individual stories resonate far more deeply and emotionally than abstract numbers, even if those numbers represent a vastly larger scale of suffering or risk.
Like terrorism versus, say, car accident.
Exactly. Terrorism statistically kills far fewer people in most places than mundane things like falling downstairs or, yes, car accidents, or even certain environmental factors. But terrorism sparks far greater outrage, fear, and public reaction because it's man-made. It has clear villains, intent. It's dramatic, visual, and fits easily into a narrative structure. It's salient. Slipping in the bathtub is just random, impersonal bad luck. We feel the sting of intentional, man-made harm far more acutely, and we overestimate its likelihood as a result.
It's not just about narratives, though. Our thinking itself seems compartmentalized, this domain specificity.
Yes, that's another crucial piece. Our brains don't operate like one single central computer processing everything the same way. We seem to use different mental machinery, different modes of thinking, in different contexts or domains.
So give an example?
The classic one involves statisticians. You could have someone who's brilliant at statistics, aces all the exams, but in a casual conversation, they might make a really basic inferential error, like the 2 hospitals problem.
Remind me of that one.
You ask which hospital is more likely to have days where, say, over 60% of babies born are boys. A large hospital or a small one?
Intuition might say the large one, or maybe it doesn't matter.
Many people, even statisticians off duty, might intuitively guess the larger one, or say it's equal. But the correct answer is the smaller hospital.
Why?
Because smaller sample sizes have much more variability. Things are more likely to deviate further from the average, which is roughly 50 boys, girls, in a small sample. The larger hospital's results will cluster much closer to the mean.
Ah, right. The law of large numbers smooths things out.
Exactly. But the point is, the statistician knows this principle inside out when they're wearing their statistician hat. But in a casual context, a different mental module kicks in, one based on intuition, and they might get it wrong.
It's like knowing you should take the stairs for exercise, but taking the escalator anyway because it's easier in the moment. Different mental gears.
Precisely. This domain specificity means we can be incredibly rigorous and logical in one area, our job, our academic field, and yet comically fallible and biased in another, often without even noticing the contradiction.
And one last bias from this section, the round-trip fallacy, confusing lack of proof with proof of lack.
Yes, the error of confusing absence of evidence with evidence of absence. The example often used is about mother's milk in the 1960s.
Doctors thought formula was just as good or better.
Some did, yes. Driven by a kind of scientific arrogance, they looked at breast milk in their labs, analyzed its components, and compared it to their engineered formulas. They focused only on what they could measure and understand chemically at the time.
And they didn't find evidence for certain benefits.
They saw no evidence for many of the complex, subtle benefits we now understand, immune factors, gut biome development, things they couldn't easily quantify or replicate. And from that absence of evidence, within their limited framework, they wrongly concluded there was evidence of absence that those benefits didn't exist.
So they recommended formula widely.
Leading to, unfortunately, widespread health issues for many babies who weren't breastfed. An entire generation, arguably, paid a heavy price for that naive inference, that mistaken assumption that what we can't see or measure simply isn't there. It's a failure to respect the complexity that lies beyond our current understanding.
Okay, so we've explored the vast realm of what we don't know, the anti-library, and how our minds trick us with confirmation bias, silent evidence, narratives, and faulty logic. Now let's stare directly at the future. Part 2, the unpredictable future.
And this is where the core argument gets, well, maybe a bit annoying for some people. The central claim is that the future will likely become increasingly less predictable, even despite our progress and growth in knowledge.
That seems paradoxical. More knowledge should mean better prediction, shouldn't it?
You'd think so. But our human nature, maybe combined with the structure of complex systems, seems to conspire to hide this deep unpredictability from us. We have to begin by just acknowledging our fundamental inability to predict the really consequential events, the Black Swans.
It's hardwired into us to want to predict, though.
Deeply. Which is why looking at history as it happened is so revealing. William Shirer's Berlin Diary is a fantastic example.
He wrote it during World War II, right? As things were unfolding.
Yes, in real time. And what's striking is that his diary shows that people living through the early stages of the war, even well-informed journalists like him, had no inkling that something momentous was taking place. Certainly not the scale of the devastation to come.
They couldn't see the big picture yet.
Not at all. Shirer's approach to recording events without the corrupting influence of knowing the subsequent outcomes reveals just how drastically hindsight distorts our perception. We look back now and weave these narratives that make WWII seem inevitable, a clear trajectory.
But it wasn't clear at the time.
Not remotely. This retrospective distortion fools us into believing things were predictable all along, when people in the moment were often baffled, confused, or focused on entirely different things.
And this illusion bleeds into our everyday lives too, doesn't it? The planning fallacy.
Oh, absolutely. We are terrible planners. We systematically, almost comically, underestimate the time and cost required for tasks, even routine ones we've done before.
Why do we do that?
A major reason is tunneling. We tend to focus narrowly on the factors internal to our plan, the steps we need to take, while completely neglecting external sources of uncertainty, disruption, and delay. The unexpected stuff.
Can you give an example of tunneling?
Sure. Imagine a writer, let's call her Sarah. She gets a 2-year contract for a book about, say, a specific political figure who's currently prominent. Sarah makes a detailed plan. Research schedule, writing targets, chapter outlines. Very internal.
Sounds organized.
Totally. But she's tunneling. She hasn't factored in the possibility that a year from now, that political figure might suddenly retire or become embroiled in a scandal that changes public perception entirely, or simply fade from the headlines as new crises emerge.
So an external event derails her perfectly good internal plan.
Exactly. The project gets derailed not because Sarah planned poorly internally, but because an external, unpredictable black swan event, a shift in the political landscape for public attention, pulls the rug out from under it. And this bias persists even when there's no incentive to lowball estimates. We just seem to be too narrow-minded a species to naturally consider how far the future can stray from our neat projections.
So if we're this bad at predicting both big historical events and our own projects, what about the people whose job it is to predict? Forecasters. You had some pretty blunt advice for them.
Yeah. It might sound harsh, but the recommendation was get another job.
Seriously, just quit.
The argument behind it is ethical, really. If someone consistently makes forecasts that are known to be ineffective, especially in areas where those forecasts can cause real harm, like finance or policy, and they know their predictions are unreliable but keep doing it
They're
anyway.
causing harm.
They are. It's akin to repeating lies simply because it's my job. There's a moral imperative, the argument goes, to recognize the profound limits of prediction in complex domains, and to have the humility to step back, or at least be incredibly transparent about the uncertainty, rather than peddling false certainty.
We're often told to trust the experts, though, especially PhDs, economists, political scientists. But research, like James Shanto's, paints a different picture.
It really does. Shanto looked into which fields actually have demonstrable expertise, especially in forecasting, versus fields where expertise is more about, well, reputation or credentials.
And what did he find about forecasters?
It turns out that financial forecasters, economists, political scientists, even clinical psychologists, when it comes to predicting future events or outcomes, show surprisingly little evidence of actual predictive skill beyond, say, simple extrapolation or chance.
Why is that?
Their feedback loops are often weak or even perverse. They make a forecast, something happens, but it's hard to definitively link the outcome back to the forecast's accuracy in a way that leads to genuine learning. Or worse, they get rewarded for sounding confident, even if they're wrong. So there's no real mechanism driving measurable improvement in their forecasting ability over time.
That's pretty damning, and Philip Tetlock's big study on political and economic experts seemed to back this up, right?
Absolutely. Tetlock's study was landmark. He tracked forecasts from hundreds of experts over many years. The results were startling. Their error rates were often many times higher than they themselves estimated. They were massively overconfident.
Did having a PhD or being famous help?
Nope. PhDs had no predictive advantage over undergraduates with a basic knowledge of the field. Well-published professors were no better than journalists. And perhaps most disturbingly, reputation often had a negative correlation with predictive accuracy.
Wait, being more famous made you a worse forecaster. How?
Possibly because the more famous experts were often famous for having one big idea, making them less flexible. It really underscores the finding that experts don't know what they don't know. Their confidence is dangerously decoupled from their actual competence in prediction.
Tetlock used that animal analogy too, didn't he? Hedgehogs versus foxes?
Yes, a brilliant distinction. Hedgehogs are the experts who know one big thing. They have a single overarching theory or model, and they tend to apply it to everything. They're often mentally married to a specific type of perhaps improbable black swan event fitting their theory.
And the foxes?
Foxes, in contrast, know many little things. They're more adaptable, more comfortable with nuance and complexity. They draw on diverse sources of information. They readily update their beliefs. They're skeptical of grand theories.
And how do they compare in forecasting?
Hedgehogs consistently performed worse as forecasters. Their narrow focus, their attachment to their one big idea, made them highly susceptible to the narrative fallacy and confirmation bias. They tried to force the messy world into their neat theoretical box. Foxes, with their more eclectic, cautious, and open-minded approach, were significantly better calibrated and more accurate, even if they didn't claim to predict specific black swans with certainty.
So it's not even about having complex models. Sometimes simpler is better.
That's what other research suggests, too. Spiros Makrodakis ran these M competitions for decades, pitting all sorts of forecasting methods against each other on real-world data. The consistent conclusion: statistically sophisticated or complex methods do not necessarily provide more accurate forecasts than simpler ones. Sometimes a complexity just adds more parameters to get wrong, or it gives a false sense of precision without actually improving the prediction.
It feels like this ties into how actual discoveries happen too. They're often not planned.
Crucially, yes. Many of the most world-changing advances, think of the computer, the internet, penicillin, the laser, were largely unplanned, unpredicted, and even unappreciated upon their discovery.
People didn't realize what they had.
Often not initially. There's frequently this retrospective illusion where we look back and imagine these breakthroughs were part of some grand strategic plan. But the reality is, they were often accidental discoveries, unexpected side effects, tinkering that led somewhere nobody foresaw. They were positive black swans.
So the really big stuff comes from outside the plan.
Thinkers like Francis Bacon centuries ago, or Arthur Koestler with his sleepwalkers analogy for scientific discovery, recognize this. The most significant discoveries often lie out of the path of the imagination. You can't predict them because you can't even conceive of them beforehand. They emerge from the unknown, from the anti-library.
Okay, this is getting deep. Let's dive into part 2.2, the mathematical limits of prediction. This feels like where the argument gets really solid, moving beyond psychology to physics and math. You mentioned Henri Poincaré.
Yes. Poincaré, often called the last great thinking mathematician, because he spanned pure math, physics, and philosophy. He used the analogy of billiard balls to show the severe limits of prediction in complex systems.
How does that work?
He calculated that to predict the path of a billiard ball accurately after just the ninth bounce off the cushions, your calculations would need to be so precise as to account for the gravitational pull of a person standing nearby.
That tiny influence matters that much, that quickly.
It gets worse. For the 56th impact, he estimated, every single elementary particle of the universe needs to be present in your assumptions. The system's sensitivity to tiny variations explodes exponentially.
So, long-term calculation is impossible.
For complex dynamic systems like that, yes. Quantitative prediction becomes fundamentally impossible beyond a very short horizon. We can only really deal with qualitative matters, the general properties of the system, not precise numerical forecasts far into the future.
And this isn't just abstract math. Edward Lorenz found this in weather modeling.
He accidentally rediscovered Poincaré's core insight in the 1960s. He was running weather simulations on an early computer. One day, to save time, he restarted a simulation midway, typing in the numbers from a previous printout.
Okay.
But he rounded the number slightly, typing in .506 instead of .506127, for instance. A minuscule difference.
And what happened?
The simulation started diverging. Slowly first, then wildly. The long-term results were completely different from the original run, all because of that tiny, seemingly insignificant rounding difference in the initial conditions.
The butterfly effect.
That's exactly where the term came from. The idea that a butterfly flapping its wings in India could theoretically cascade through the incredibly complex weather system and eventually cause a hurricane in New York weeks or months later. It's the essence of chaos theory. Extreme sensitivity to initial conditions in complex systems.
Which makes long-term weather forecasting fundamentally impossible beyond a certain point.
Precisely. And the same principle applies to many other complex systems, economies, ecosystems, social dynamics.
Yet we have tools like Excel spreadsheets that seem to encourage precise forecasting.
And that's the danger. These modern tools, while incredibly powerful for organizing data, can foster a dangerous illusion of certainty. Before computers, making projections was laborious, often done roughly. You knew it was an estimate.
But now you can make spreadsheets with forecasts stretching years out, down to the second decimal place.
Exactly. It looks precise, scientific. But those forecasts are often based on highly unstable reference points, maybe last year's sales figures, which themselves were subject to randomness, or worse, influenced by completely arbitrary anchors.
Anchors. Like the Kahneman and Tversky experiment.
Yeah, we're asking people for the last digits of their social security number before asking them to estimate something unrelated, like the number of dentists in Manhattan, unconsciously biases their estimate towards that random number. Spreadsheets can be full of these hidden, unstable assumptions. We don't see the rapid forecast degradation, how quickly the errors multiply as projections extend further into the future. Those precise numbers offer a false sense of security, hiding a foundation of sand.
This brings us back to the critique of the Nobel Prize in economics, awarding models based on Gaussian assumptions.
Yes, the critique is that the prize has, on multiple occasions, been awarded to academics like Markovitz, Sharp, Scholes, Merton, for developing these mathematically elegant, beautifully Platonic models, primarily for finance.
What's the problem with them being beautiful or Platonic?
The fundamental problem is they are built on a Gaussian base. They assume that the randomness in financial markets and many other domains behaves like things in mediocristan, following a nice, predictable bell curve where extreme events are incredibly rare and essentially negligible.
But you argue that's not how markets or many other real-world things actually work.
Not an extremistan, no. In domains like finance, wealth, technological change, or historical events, extreme outcomes are far more common and impactful than a bell curve predicts. These models assume mild randomness, but the reality is often wild randomness. And if you take away their Gaussian assumptions, their elegant theories often collapse into, well, hot air. They simply don't apply where it matters most.
Yet they get the Nobel Prize, and people use these models.
And the confirmation error persists. People find data sets without extreme events, maybe looking at short time periods or specific stable markets, and say, see, it fits the bell curve. They conveniently ignore the fact that just one sufficiently extreme event can completely invalidate the entire Gaussian premise for risk management.
There's also this philosophical problem, the circularity of statistics. It sounds like a catch-22.
It really is. It's a severe regress argument. Think about it. To understand the risks or probabilities in a system, we need to look at past data. But how much past data do we need to be confident?
Enough to figure out the underlying probability distribution.
Exactly. But to know if we have enough data, we already need to know something about that probability distribution specifically, how likely extreme events are, how fat the tails are. If extreme events are possible but rare, you might need centuries of data to see one.
So you need the distribution to know if you have enough data, but you need the data to know the distribution.
Precisely. It's this self-referential loop. Like the old paradox, Epimenides the Cretan says all Cretans are liars. Is he telling the truth? This circularity means that establishing truly reliable, probabilistic knowledge, especially about rare, high-impact events, is inherently problematic. It's built on assumptions that can't be rigorously proven from the data itself.
And applying that shaky knowledge to real-world risk.
It can have severe consequences. Think of financial models underestimating crash risk before 2008.
So the practical upshot of all this math and chaos theory is pretty stark.
It is. There is simply no reliable way to compute the probabilities of rare yet consequential events, these black swans. Even with mountains of economic data, statisticians have found that a single day's observation, like the 1987 crash, can represent 90% or more of the kurtosis.
Kurtosis. That's the measure of the fatness of the tails, right? How likely extreme events are.
Exactly. It means the measure itself is incredibly unstable. One single data point can radically change your estimate of future extreme risk. This inherent instability means that standard statistical tools that rely heavily on the Gaussian framework, things like standard deviation or variance or beta in finance, are effectively bogus when applied to extremistan-style randomness. They give a false sense of measurable risk.
And even small errors in models can have huge effects.
Especially in models that try to capture this wild randomness, like fractal models. Tiny observational errors or slight misspecifications in the model can change the estimated probabilities of rare events by factors of 10, 100, or even more. The results are just too sensitive to be reliable for prediction.
So what's the final conclusion from this mathematical impossibility?
The implication is clear and practical. If you cannot reliably compute the probability of a harmful rare event in a certain domain, you must avoid exposure to it or build in massive robustness. You cannot manage risk based on flawed probability estimates of black swans. You have to assume they can happen and act accordingly.
This leads us into the human element again, part 2.3. Human nature's resistance to uncertainty. It's not just the math, it's us. Let's talk about how not to be a nerd.
Right. This distinguishes between two fundamental ways of learning and interacting with the world. There's the Platonic approach, which is top-down, rule-based, theory-driven.
Like learning grammar rules from a textbook.
Exactly. The bookworm, the nerd in this analogy, learns a language by memorizing the formal grammar rules, believing there's some higher grammatical authority that dictates how the language should work.
And the aplatonic way.
That's bottom-up, experience-based, messy. The non-nerd learns a language by living it through immersion, social interaction, picking up nuances, exceptions, idioms organically. They develop an intuitive feel for it.
So the nerd thinks reality should conform to the rules.
Often, yes. Bureaucrats, economists, social scientists sometimes fall into this Platonic trap. They develop elegant equations or models and believe the world should operate according to them. They tend to dismiss or repress the messy, tacit, or implicit knowledge, the practical wisdom, the street smarts that can't easily be written down or formalized in their theories. They privilege the map over the territory.
It's theory versus practice again. And the past itself, even if we study it, can be really misleading. You mentioned the grewness of emerald. That sounds cryptic.
It's a philosophical concept, but the idea is this. The past doesn't just give us one clear lesson. It offers many degrees of freedom in how we interpret it. The same historical data can often be used to confirm a theory and its exact opposite.
Like the turkey example.
The famous Thanksgiving turkey example, yes. Every day, the farmer feeds the turkey. From the turkey's perspective, each feeding is further confirmation of the farmer's benevolence and the safety of its world. The evidence overwhelmingly points towards continued feeding.
Until Thanksgiving morning.
Exactly. The turkey's model, based on perfectly consistent past data, catastrophically fails. The same data stream could have been interpreted differently, perhaps each feeding bringing it closer to its doom. The point is, while a simple linear model might draw one straight line projecting the past into the future, you can actually draw an infinite number of different curves that perfectly fit all the past data points but diverge wildly in the future.
So history doesn't provide a single reliable blueprint for the future.
No. The lessons we extract often depend heavily on the narrative we impose onto the past data, which is influenced by our present biases and concerns.
And then there's this idea of future blindness. You compare it almost to autism.
It's a provocative comparison, used to highlight a specific cognitive difficulty. Just as individuals with autism sometimes struggle with theory of mind, putting themselves in others' shoes, or understanding intentions, many of us seem to struggle with putting ourselves in the shoes of our future selves, or thinking dynamically about how things might change. We have this mental block about the future as a different state.
How does that show up?
We often fail to learn recursively from our past errors in predicting our own future emotional states. We consistently make these same mistakes in forecasting how events will affect us.
Which leads directly to mispredicting happiness, right?
Yes. We tend to grossly overestimate the length and intensity of the effect of misfortune on our lives. We think losing our job, or a relationship ending, or even suffering a disability will be utterly devastating and make us permanently unhappy.
But usually people adapt.
Remarkably well, often. We have a psychological immune system. We adapt, find new sources of happiness, recalibrate our expectations. This impact bias, overestimating the emotional impact of future events, might have an evolutionary purpose. Maybe it motivates us to strive and avoid immediate negative outcomes.
But it hinders us in other ways.
It prevents us from accurately perceiving and preparing for modern risks that we do not fear because they are not vivid. Long-term financial insecurity, slow environmental degradation, abstract health risks. These don't trigger the same immediate fear response as a vivid, tangible threat, even if they're ultimately far more consequential. Our emotional forecasting is poorly calibrated for modern abstract risks.
It's fascinating how our wiring works against us. And even the butterfly effect metaphor gets misused.
Hugely misused. People often interpret it as encouragement. See, small actions can have big consequences, so if I just recycle this bottle, maybe I can change the world. Like the movie Happenstance, where tiny choices lead to grand romantic outcomes.
But that's not the real point of chaos theory.
Not for prediction, no. It confuses a backward-looking explanation with a forward-looking prediction. We can look back and say, wow, it's amazing how that tiny chance encounter led to this huge outcome. That's tracing a path after it happened.
But we can't look forward and know which tiny event will cause a big outcome.
Exactly. Given the trillions of such small things happening in the course of a simple day, trying to identify and manipulate the right butterfly to produce a desired hurricane is utterly beyond our reach. It's an illusion of control fueled by retrospective storytelling, not a predictive tool.
So prediction is flawed, math has limits, our brains are biased. What's the way out? You suggest something radical. Denarrate.
To denarrate is a call to actively fight back against these cognitive traps. It means consciously reducing your exposure to the constant barrage of simplifying, often misleading narratives.
Like turn off the news.
Pretty much. Shut down the television set, minimize time spent reading newspapers, ignore the blogs, or at least consume them with extreme skepticism. Recognize they are often designed to provide simple stories, to trigger emotional responses, rather than convey complex truths.
And what do you do instead?
Train your reasoning abilities. Consciously engage your slower, more analytical thinking, what Kahneman calls System 2, to override the fast, emotional, narrative-driven System 1 when making important decisions. Learn to distinguish between the sensational headline and the actual empirical evidence.
Create some mental distance.
Exactly. This insulation from the toxicity of the world, this deliberate filtering of noise, isn't just about achieving deeper understanding. It can also genuinely improve your well-being by reducing anxiety and outrage fueled by manufactured narratives. It's about creating space for real thought.
Okay, let's shift gears into part 3. Those gray swans of extremistan. This introduces a really critical distinction you make between two fundamentally different types of environments where randomness plays out. Mediocristan and extremistan.
This distinction is absolutely central. Understanding which world you're operating in fundamentally changes how uncertainty behaves, how impactful rare events can be, and how you should approach risk and decision-making.
So first, what's mediocristan? The boring one.
You could call it the realm of the average. In mediocristan, typical occurrences dominate. Things cluster very tightly around the mean, and extreme deviations are incredibly rare and, crucially, inconsequential to the total.
Like human height?
Perfect example. Or weight or calorie consumption. If you take a sample of, say, 1,000 people, and then you add the single tallest person on Earth to that sample, the average height barely budges. One extreme observation doesn't really change the overall picture.
So averages mean something here. The law of large numbers applies.
Exactly. As you add more samples, uncertainty shrinks, and the average becomes very stable and meaningful. Statistical methods, based on the bell curve, the Gaussian distribution, work pretty well in mediocristan because those extreme outliers are truly negligible.
Okay, that sounds manageable, predictable almost. But then there's extremistan.
And extremistan is a completely different beast. This is the domain where the extreme, the rare, the single instance can have a wildly disproportionate, even dominant impact on the total. Here, a few occurrences have had huge influences on history.
Examples.
Think about wealth. If you take a sample of 1,000 people and add Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos, the average wealth skyrockets. One observation completely dominates the total. Book sales are another example. A handful of blockbusters account for a huge percentage of all sales. Internet traffic, citations of scientific papers, damage from earthquakes, market crashes. Many crucial phenomena live in extremistan.
And in extremistan, standard statistics break down.
They become dangerously misleading. Concepts like standard deviation effectively do not exist in a stable, meaningful way. They jump around wildly depending on whether your sample happens to include one of those massive outliers. Averages are often meaningless because they're completely skewed by the extremes. The bell curve is the wrong map entirely.
So using bell curve thinking in extremistan, it's like missing the giants.
It's exactly like focusing on the grass and missing out on the gigantic trees. Those unpredictable large deviations, the black swans, might be rare individually, but their cumulative impact is dramatic. You simply cannot dismiss them as mere outliers because they define the total outcome in extremistan. One tree contains vastly more wood than millions of blades of grass.
This explains why some historical attempts to apply averages everywhere were misguided, this quetilismus.
Right. Thinkers like Adolphe Quetelet in the 19th century were kind of obsessed with the bell curve. Fueled by this post-Enlightenment desire for order and the aurea mediocritas, the golden mean, they started seeing bell curves everywhere, trying to find the average man.
A kind of wishful thinking for a neat, predictable world.
Mixed with Platonicity, yes. They wanted the world to fit their elegant, symmetrical models. But this completely failed to acknowledge the wild, extreme, non-Gaussian nature of many crucial real-world phenomena. They were imposing mediocristan logic onto an extremistan reality.
So, for anyone listening, the absolute key takeaway is figure out which world you're in. Are you dealing with mediocristan, where averages rule and things are somewhat predictable?
Or are you an extremistan, where averages are useless, samples can fool you, and you're constantly vulnerable to massive surprises, both good and bad? Making that distinction is the first step towards navigating uncertainty intelligently.
Okay, that distinction is clear. Now, let's move to part 3.2. The dynamics of scalability and its consequences. How does this mediocristan extremistan split play out in careers and income?
It plays out dramatically through the concept of scalability. We can divide professions into two broad categories.
Non-scalable first.
Right. These are professions that are very mediocristan-like in their income distribution. Think of dentists, consultants, massage therapists, bakers, plumbers. Your income is largely capped because you work by the hour or per service rendered.
Your physical presence is required.
Generally, yes. Your revenue depends on your continuous linear effort. You can't easily serve 10 times the clients in the same amount of time. Output scales directly with input time. Success here is usually more predictable, more incremental. It's not typically driven by black swans. A dentist won't suddenly become a billionaire from one amazing root canal.
Makes sense. And the other side, scalable professions.
These are very extremistan-like. Think of idea people. Writers, artists, software developers, inventors, financial traders, entrepreneurs.
What makes them scalable?
You can add zeros to your output and potentially your income with little or no additional effort per unit. You write the book once, but it can sell 1 million copies. You code the software once, it can be used by billions. Your effort is front-loaded, but the potential reach is enormous.
You don't have to be physically present for every sale or use.
Exactly. You can, metaphorically, work from your bathtub or from a bar in Rome, because what's being valued and replicated is your idea, your creation, not your time directly. This is the realm where you can truly get lucky, where a single hit, a positive black swan, can lead to disproportionately massive success.
And historically, the rise of scalability changed everything.
Fundamentally, think back before mass communication. Bards, storytellers, musicians, they had local audiences. They were shielded from global competition. Their performance couldn't be easily replicated and distributed widely.
But then came writing, the printing press.
Exactly. The alphabet, then printing, then recording technologies, now the internet. These innovations made ideas infinitely replicable. This drove the emergence of a winner-take-all ecology.
Where a few individuals get almost everything.
Pretty much. The top authors, the superstar musicians, the blockbuster movies, the dominant software platforms, they capture a huge share of the market and the rewards, while the vast majority in the long tail get relatively little. It creates extreme inequality of outcomes, characteristic of extremistan.
And this is especially true in fields where talent is hard to measure objectively, like the arts.
Yes. In highly technical fields, like playing the piano at a virtuoso level or performing complex surgery, skill is relatively ascertainable. You can judge competence more objectively. But in many creative fields, writing, film, visual arts, talent is often a judgment made after success, not necessarily the sole cause of it.
Luck plays a huge role.
A large dose of nonlinear luck is often involved in making a particular book, movie, or artist breakthrough. Success often spreads through social contagions. People imitate others, they want to like what's popular, to feel part of the group. This creates feedback loops where fame builds on fame, sometimes detached from purely objective quality.
You mentioned a personal experience related to this achieving a level of financial independence, this FU money, after the '87 crash. How did that change things for you?
It was transformative. It wasn't about becoming mega rich. It was about having enough of a psychological buffer, enough capital, that I no longer had to make decisions based primarily on financial considerations.
Freedom from.
Freedom from having to prostitute my mind, as Taleb puts it. Freedom from taking jobs I didn't believe in or compromising intellectual integrity just to earn a living. It fundamentally freed me from the need for validation or approval from outside authority in my work.
You said it cured you of financial ambition. What did that feel like?
It felt like liberation, like putting down a heavy weight I didn't realize I was carrying. The constant low-level anxiety about income, about pleasing bosses or markets just dissipated. It allowed me to truly reevaluate what mattered.
And how did you restructure your life towards becoming this flaneur?
It meant ruthlessly prioritizing time for deep thinking, reading, and exploring ideas without a specific, immediate payoff in mind. It meant saying no to almost everything that felt like an obligation or a distraction from that core intellectual pursuit. Organizing life to allow for minimal but intense work, focusing only on the most technical or intellectually stimulating aspects, and reserving large chunks of time for unstructured contemplation, observation, walking, thinking, connecting ideas. The flaneur observes the city, the crowd. I tried to observe the flow of ideas and risks.
That sounds like a rare kind of luxury, and it contrasts sharply with the stress of someone like Nero, the trader, with the bleeds strategy.
Yes, Nero's strategy is the opposite extreme of seeking comfort. He consciously chose a path of losing money steadily, day after day, taking small, predictable losses.
Why on earth would someone do that?
Because he was essentially selling insurance against rare, catastrophic events. He collected premiums, represented by those small losses, betting that eventually a black swan would occur, and when it did, the payoff would be disproportionately massive, wiping out all the previous small losses and generating huge profits.
So banking on the rare disaster.
Exactly. But the psychological cost was immense. The book describes how his body disagreed so heavily with his mind. The chronic stress of those continuous small losses, even though intellectually he knew the strategy was sound, took a physical toll. Fatigue, anxiety, even measurable changes in the brain, like hippocampal atrophy.
Wow. It shows the deep conflict between rational understanding and our gut reactions to constant loss.
It really highlights the mental, even physical warfare required to operate effectively in extremistan, especially when you're positioned to profit from negative events. Our bodies aren't really designed for that kind of sustained low-level stress, even if it's part of a rational strategy.
So thinking about markets more broadly, this suggests maybe free markets work not just because they reward skill,
but because they allow people to be lucky, thanks to aggressive trial and error. Capitalism, in this view, isn't just about efficient allocation based on known skills. It thrives on the revitalization of the world, thanks to the opportunity to be lucky.
It's an engine for experimentation.
Exactly. It allows individuals and companies to take risks, to try new things, most of which will fail. But the few that succeed, often due to unpredictable factors or luck, can generate massive innovation and wealth. This includes the long tail phenomena, new niches, new players constantly emerging, challenging the incumbents. This fosters cognitive diversity and prevents the system from becoming completely ossified, conceited, and self-serving. It needs that constant churn of trial, error, and occasional lucky success.
Okay, let's put some structure on this with part 3.3, the Black Swan domain. Living in the fourth quadrant. You propose a framework for thinking about different kinds of uncertainty exposure.
Yes, it's a way to map out decisions based on two factors: how complex the payoff is, simple or complex, and the type of randomness involved, mediocristan or extremistan.
So 4 quadrants, what's quadrant 1?
Quadrant 1 is the simplest. Simple payoff, mediocristan randomness. Think of a basic casino bet like red or black and roulette, or a simple coin flip wager.
Wow.
Outcomes are clear, probabilities are reasonably well defined, and the impact of any single event is small. Traditional statistics work well here.
Okay, quadrant 2.
Quadrant 2 is complex payoff, but still mediocristan randomness.
Right.
This is where things like standard insurance calculations often live, or maybe simple non-leveraged investing in large, stable assets. The calculations might be more involved, but the underlying randomness is assumed to be relatively mild, bell curve-like. Statistical methods can work, with some caution.
Quadrant 3 gets interesting. Simple payoff, but extremistan randomness.
Right. This is where venture capital often sits. The payoff structure is simple in one sense.
Yep.
You invest, and the company either fails, you lose your investment, a capped, simple downside, or it succeeds spectacularly, a potentially unlimited upside. The randomness driving that success or failure is extremistan, highly unpredictable, winner-take-all dynamics.
So the key here is the limited downside.
Yes. In this quadrant, there's little harm in being wrong on any single bet because your loss is capped. But you have massive exposure to positive black swans. It's a strategy deliberately designed to benefit from extremistan's upside potential while limiting the downside. It's hunting for white swans.
And then the danger zone, quadrant the 4.
Quadrant the 4th is the black swan domain proper. Complex payoff and extremistan randomness. This is where the problem resides, but also, tantalizingly, where opportunities are present too, though requiring extreme caution.
What kinds of things live here?
Think about predicting war damage, geopolitical risks, the impact of novel technologies, or the performance of complex, highly leveraged financial derivatives. The payoffs are incredibly complex and interconnected, and the underlying randomness is wild and unpredictable. This quadrant demands the absolute highest degree of skepticism.
Because models are most likely to fail here.
Utterly fragile. In quadrant 4th, the argument is that no theory or model should be considered reliable. Or perhaps more strongly, relying on any specific model might be worse than admitting ignorance, because the model gives you a false sense of understanding and control in a domain where true prediction is impossible, and the consequences of being wrong can be catastrophic.
So the crucial insight isn't to try and predict in quadrant 4.
No, that's futile. The insight is to change your exposure. Try to move your activities or structure your affairs so you spend less time vulnerable in quadrant 4 and more time benefiting from quadrant 3. Design systems, strategies, or lifestyles that are robust to negative black swans by limiting downside exposure, while maximizing your exposure to positive ones by allowing for unlimited upside.
This connects to the idea of iatrogenics, doesn't it? Harm caused by the healer.
Yes, a very important concept. Iatrogenics refers to harm caused by medical examination or treatment. More broadly, it points to our powerful bias toward acts of commission, doing something, intervening over acts of omission, doing nothing, waiting, observing.
We feel better if we're actively doing something, even if it's useless or harmful.
Often, yes. It explains why we crave positive advice. Tell me what to do to succeed. Much more than negative advice, tell me what to avoid to prevent failure. Bookstores are crammed with how to succeed guides, but you rarely find titles like What I Learned Going Bankrupt or Mistakes to Avoid in Medicine.
And historically, medicine itself caused harm this way.
Absolutely. For centuries, interventions like bloodletting, purging, and countless dubious treatments likely caused far more harm than good, driven by the doctor's urge to do something. They were often reluctant to just do nothing, even when that was the best course, because it felt nihilistic or like they weren't earning their keep. Even today, things like overdiagnosis and overtreatment can lead to significant iatrogenic harm. The intervention causes more problems than the original, perhaps minor condition.
So negative advice, what not to do, is incredibly valuable, but underrated.
Hugely valuable, especially in complex domains. It's often easier and safer to figure out what actions are likely to make things worse and avoid those, rather than trying to find the one magic bullet action that will guarantee success. It's about removing sources of fragility first.
Okay, so within that dangerous fourth quadrant, if we have to operate there, what are some rules for building robustness? You mentioned incentives.
Rule number 1, beware incentives. Be extremely wary or outright prohibit letting someone whose compensation is based on an incentive bonus, especially one tied to short-term performance-managed systems, with potential for catastrophic black swan risks like nuclear power plants or highly leveraged financial portfolios.
Why is that bonus structure so dangerous?
Because it creates a terrible asymmetry. The manager gets huge rewards if things go well in the short term, even if based on hidden risks, but they often face little personal penalty if the whole thing blows up later due to a rare event they weren't paid to worry about. It incentivizes taking hidden, potentially fatal risks, cutting corners on safety, using excessive leverage to maximize that short-term bonus. They get the upside, society or the company gets the downside.
A recipe for fragility. What's the second rule?
Compensate complexity with simplicity. In our incredibly complex, interconnected, globalized world, especially in finance, we need to deliberately introduce simplicity, buffers, and redundancy, not more complexity.
Counterintuitive again. Don't complex problems need complex solutions?
Not necessarily. Truly resilient, complex systems like natural ecosystems derive their strength from slack and redundancy, from having overlapping functions, backup systems, unused capacity. They are not optimized to the razor's edge of efficiency. Modern finance, often driven by naive optimization and excessive debt, strips away these buffers, leaving the system hyper-efficient in stable times, but incredibly brittle and vulnerable to wild and dangerous gyrations when the unexpected hits. We need more fat, more cushions, not more leverage and complexity disguised as sophistication.
This sounds almost stoic, like Seneca.
Very much so. Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher who was also, interestingly, extremely wealthy, offered profound wisdom for dealing with uncertainty and potential loss. Unlike some philosophers who just condemned wealth, Seneca acknowledged its practical uses but emphasized the importance of mental detachment.
How did he practice that?
He recommended mentally rehearsing the loss of your wealth, your status, your health on a regular basis. Not to be morbid, but to prepare yourself psychologically, to strip fortune of its power over your inner peace.
So you're less afraid of losing things.
Exactly. It helps overcome our natural loss aversion. By contemplating and accepting the possibility of loss, you become more robust to actual misfortune when it strikes. You understand that losing your fortune or your current position, while unpleasant, is likely less devastating and more survivable than your fearful imagination predicts. Humans are incredibly adaptable. True wealth, for Seneca, was inner resilience, not external possessions.
Okay, that brings us to our final section, part 4. Navigating the unknown of Virginia's white swans and the path forward. We've talked a lot about risks and downsides, but the black swan isn't just about threats, is it?
Not at all. It's equally, perhaps even more importantly, about unexpected, massive positive opportunities. The crucial point remains. You can't reliably predict these positive black swans either.
So what can you do?
You can set yourself up to collect serendipitous black swans, of the positive kind, by maximizing your exposure to them. It's about positioning yourself, being open, tinkering, exploring, creating the conditions where good luck is more likely to find you.
A more optimistic stance. And you use the figure of Yevgenia Nikolaevna to embody this. Who is she?
Yevgenia is presented as a sort of intellectual archetype, a writer and thinker, a pioneer of the fictional consilient school. She embodies this potential for positive black swans.
What did she do?
She championed presenting ideas in their raw form, exposing them to public judgment without trying to dumb them down, package them nicely, or pander to conventional expectations. She wasn't afraid to publish challenging interdisciplinary work that didn't fit neatly into existing boxes.
Like mixing physics and philosophy.
Exactly. The Consilient School was about breaking down those disciplinary silos, looking for unexpected connections. Yevgenia's journey illustrates how operating in a scalable profession like writing or research allows someone to potentially cross the chasm between underdog and supreme hero overnight.
Because one idea can suddenly take off.
Yes. Her efforts might yield nothing for years, and then suddenly one book or one key idea resonates, spreads like wildfire, and has a massive, disproportionate impact. She benefits from the extreme upside potential of extremistan. This represents the deliberate harnessing of white swans, these beneficial, serendipitous outcomes that can transform everything.
But this path requires enduring a lot of uncertainty and maybe failure along the way. You call it the antechamber of hope.
It's a huge psychological challenge. Many individuals pursuing these scalable, high uncertainty paths, artists, entrepreneurs, researchers like Evgenia, labor for incredibly long periods with little or no tangible results, no positive feedback. They face skepticism, doubt, even peer cruelty. They look like failures to the outside world, sometimes even to themselves.
They need to keep going on faith.
They require this continuously adjourned gratification, sustained primarily by internal drive and hope, waiting for that potentially life-changing lumpy event, the breakthrough, the bestseller, the successful discovery that brings grand vindication. And crucially, that event may never come. It highlights the immense emotional and social costs. For many people, the highest currency is respect, and that can be very hard to come by when you're toiling away in apparent obscurity.
But institutions often handle this better than individuals. Venture capitalists, publishers.
They often do, yes. Why? Because they don't place all their hopes on one single bet. They operate by making many small bets, spreading their exposure across a portfolio of random outcomes. They collect opportunities.
They're playing the numbers game.
In a sense, they implicitly follow Louis Pasteur's famous adage, luck favors the prepared mind. Or maybe luck favors the prepared portfolio. It's not about predicting which specific startup or book will be the next Black Swan, but about maximizing the number of opportunities for unplanned, rare, positive events to occur within their sphere, ensuring they capture some of those white swans when they inevitably appear.
This diversification approach leads to another strategy, the barbell strategy. You mentioned it applies to fitness, but also life.
Yes, the concept comes from observing how some people approach fitness, maybe periods of extreme intensity combined with long periods of rest, rather than constant moderate effort. The underlying idea is that biological organisms, including humans and perhaps even economies, aren't optimized for constant stability. They actually need extremistan-style variability, occasional acute stressors, to become truly robust and adaptable.
So our modern obsession with moderation is wrong.
Often, yes. Our ingrained, perhaps platonic belief in steady exercise and steady nutrition, moderation in all things, might be a misguided projection of our desire for predictable order. Evolutionarily, we were likely designed for more extreme cycles, feast and famine, periods of intense exertion followed by recovery, not constant, gentle equilibrium. That variability, those shocks, are what build resilience.
How does this translate into a practical life or investment strategy?
The barbell strategy translates to being extremely conservative, even paranoid in certain areas, the bulk of your resources, while simultaneously taking many small, aggressive risks in other areas, a small portion of your resources.
So safety on one side, wild speculation on the other.
Pretty much. For example, keep 90% of your investments in extremely safe, boring assets, like cash or government bonds, the conservative end of the barbell. Then take the remaining 10% and invest it aggressively in highly speculative ventures, maybe hundreds of tiny bets on startups or risky ideas. The aggressive end.
What does this achieve?
It protects you from ruinous negative black swans. Your downside is strictly limited to that 10%, while giving you significant exposure to potentially unlimited upside from positive black swans in the speculative portion. You benefit from extremistan's opportunities without being destroyed by its dangers. It's a way to structure for anti-fragility.
Okay, finally, part 4.2, wisdom in a world of complexity. Bringing it all together, what's the path forward?
The path forward emphasizes skeptical empiricism. It's a bottom-up approach, it's theory-modest, evidence-based, and crucially, it accepts the inherent limits of our knowledge and predictive abilities, especially in complex systems.
So less reliance on grand theories.
Much less. It contrasts sharply with the Platonic, top-down quest for universal theories that often crumble when they meet messy reality. We need to learn to live and make decisions without a general theory for many important domains. And we need to value that tacit or implicit knowledge, the practical wisdom, the heuristics learned through experience that can't be easily written down, but is often suppressed by formal systems.
Like how Mother Nature operates.
Mother Nature is the ultimate skeptical empiricist. She doesn't operate based on a grand theory. She operates through trial and error, evolution, adaptation. Complex natural systems thrive on webs of interdependence, nonlinearities, and a robust ecology. And crucially, nature builds in massive redundancy.
Backup systems. Slack.
Exactly. Multiple ways to achieve the same function, spare capacity, diversity. Why? Because, as the saying goes, You don't know today what may be needed tomorrow. Nature anticipates the unexpected by having reserves. This is the complete opposite of the naive optimization often pushed by economists or engineers, like suggesting we centralize everything or share organs to be more efficient. That kind of optimization strips away redundancy and makes systems incredibly fragile, brittle, and vulnerable to black swans.
Which connects back to globalization. Efficient, but fragile.
It's a double-edged sword, absolutely. Globalization has brought efficiencies, yes, but the increased interconnectedness and operating leverage mean that small cracks in one spot can percolate rapidly through the entire system. Think of the 2008 financial crisis spreading globally almost instantly.
It creates concentration.
It can lead to a species density effect, where a few dominant companies, platforms, or ideas emerge globally. This makes epidemics, whether biological, financial, or cultural, potentially more acute. Cultural life becomes more concentrated. Financial systems become more vulnerable to systemic runs on the banks because everyone is linked, and fragility increases.
But there's a counterforce, the long tail.
Yes, thankfully. The long-tail phenomenon, supercharged by the internet, acts as a powerful force for cognitive diversity. It allows niche ideas, specialized products, and diverse viewpoints to find an audience and survive, bypassing the traditional gatekeepers.
So it challenges the dominant players.
It subverts that ossified, conceited, and self-serving authority by allowing new entrants and alternative approaches to flourish. It acts as an engine for tinkering, for experimentation, for evolution at the edges, which is a vital source of resilience and anti-fragility for the system as a whole.
And ultimately, the real freedom comes back to mental independence, that four-letter word.
Independence. It's about cultivating the mental ability to not owe any explanation to anybody for your beliefs, provided they are reasoned. To critically evaluate information for yourself, regardless of authority or consensus. And again, to insulate yourself from the toxicity of the world, the constant noise, the manipulative narratives, the outrage cycles. Protecting your mental space is key.
But we still need community, right? We're social animals.
Absolutely. We are local animals. We need connection, dignity, respect. But the key is we have some freedom to choose our peers, our intellectual community.
Finding your tribe.
Exactly. Forming schools of thought, connecting with like-minded skeptics, joining communities that embrace unusual ideas or anti-fragile practices. This provides crucial insulation and mutual validation. It allows black swan hunters, the tinkerers, the skeptical empiricists to pursue their path without feeling completely isolated or ostracized by the mainstream. It's about building your own supportive ecosystem for robust thinking and living.
We have covered a huge amount of ground today on the deep dive. We started with Umberto Eco's anti-library, that powerful symbol of what we don't know, and why acknowledging that anti-knowledge is so fundamental.
We saw how our own minds trip us up confirmation bias, the lure of narrative, ignoring silent evidence, and why prediction, especially of big events, is often a dangerous illusion, backed up by math and chaos theory.
And that crucial distinction between predictable mediocristan and wild extremistan, which changes all the rules of randomness and risk.
And finally, we explored strategies not for predicting black swans, but for navigating a world full of them. Building robustness through things like the barbell strategy, valuing negative advice, seeking simplicity, and maximizing exposure to those positive surprises, the serendipitous white swans.
It comes down to humility, skepticism, and resilience. So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on. You might find yourself naturally shallow and superficial, and you might not even realize it. We all can be.
But by consciously embracing learned ignorance, that deep humility that comes from truly understanding the limits of your knowledge, and by cultivating a healthy, rigorous skepticism, you can start to peel back the layers to distinguish the sensational noise from the empirical signal.
Consider this. Maybe the truly wise person isn't the one who claims they can see the future coming,
but the one who knows deeply that they cannot see things far away, that the map is not the territory.
So ask yourself, how much of the knowledge you rely on every day is genuinely robust to the unexpected? Where might you be mistaking a neat, tidy map in your head for the messy, complex, fractal territory of reality?
Challenge your assumptions. Question the experts politely but firmly. Seek out the wisdom of negative advice. What should you avoid doing, not just what should you do? Think about how you can build more redundancy, more slack, more anti-fragility into your own life, your finances, your thinking. Move towards a state where you're not just hoping for the best,
but actively preparing for the unpredictable, maybe even positioning yourself to welcome the unexpected gift of a white swan when it arrives.